My buddies and I were camping in the woods in Yosemite, California. We were the only ones in the area, and we knew this because of the camping registry. We were quite literally the only ones in a 20-mile radius. Anyways, everything was great and normal, and our campsite was on the side of a lake. At night, we all shared an 8-man tent. It was cozy with 8 guys in a tent, but not horrible. Anyways, at about 3 a.m. the first night, we were all suddenly awoken by one member of the group standing up in the tent and frantically opening the tent door. He poked his head out, began super frantically and nervously saying, "There's someone in our camp." He kept repeating it and sounded absolutely terrified. Needless to say, we were fucking horrified that someone might be in our camp because we knew that we were supposed to be alone. Everyone who had just been woken up was looking at each other with mortified looks on their faces. After about 15 seconds of saying that someone was in our camp, he laid back down like nothing had happened and slept. The motherfucker was sleepwalking. There was no one in the camp. It was hard to fall back asleep. This happened after my hunt for some whitetail in northern Michigan. I was leaving the woods and heading for my car for the long ride home. The sun was setting and the air was crisp, the smell of fall in the air. As I got to my car, I heard some rustling in the bush on the other side of the trail I was parked on. Thinking it was an animal, I looked across and saw a guy standing there. He was slightly swaying from side to side. Not a drunk sway, but more of an impatient standing in line for a long time type of sway. I said,
"Hey man, you lost?"
He didn't answer, but he gave the creepiest smirk and tilted his head back slightly without taking his eyes off of me. Needless to say, I was creeped out. My guns made me feel protected, but as I loaded my pack and my shotgun in the car, I didn't take my eyes off of him, and he kept his locked on mine. I kept my 9mm on me in case he tried something. I was parked parallel to the trail, so when I got in the car I could still see him. I drove and checked my mirror. He was in the middle of the trail just walking in my direction. That was the creepiest day hunting I've ever had. Went turkey hunting with my dad in the Shawnee National Forest several years ago. I was about 10. Took one afternoon to hike and scout hunting spots. Along the trail, we saw a few blood splatters and drips, but not a big deal. It's nature. About a quarter mile up the trail, however, we come up to 3 dogs hanging from a tree, gutted, bled out, and skinned. Okay, now that was pretty weird and scary. We kept going a bit further as there was a bluff not too far up that way that was pretty cool to look at. Come to the bluff, find weird symbols burned into the ground and on the sides of the rock wall. Candle wax absolutely everywhere and more blood all over the ground. By that time, my dad, whom I've never seen scared in my life, looked at me and said, "Let's go." We took off at a pretty quick pace back to the camp. The worst part is that we didn't leave the campsite, so that night, I laid awake in the camper freaking out at every sound I heard. I still get goosebumps thinking about that event to this day. I was at a lake in the woods, fishing with my 4-year-old kid and wife. There was nobody there except us. The lake was surrounded by a dense forest of trees, brush, and the like. We were about 50 yards from our vehicle, down a hill, at the bank with our poles resting in the water. The fishing was slow, so I decided to test out my new camera. So I walked around the general area while my wife sat with our child and tended with fishing poles. I walked up a hill from the bank and through the dense trees to the mouth of a clearing where all of a sudden I see four guys, approximately 20 yards away, just out there in the woods. They looked like a cross between grunge band members and deep woods hillbillies. I don't know how they were dirty and had unwashed looking raggedy hair and clothes. We were in the boondocks, so they just stood there looking at me for what seemed like a good solid 2 or 3 minutes. The look in this one's eyes of either desperation or malevolent intentions. I played it off and just focused my camera in a different direction. Then I noticed that one of them had somehow managed to move closer to where I was at, and I immediately felt really uneasy. I mean, why in the hell were these guys just out here so far in the middle of nowhere? No fishing poles, no hiking gear, nothing. The one that had moved closer to where I was at said out of the blue,
Hey, won't you come and take our picture?
then he kinda half giggled, revealing rotted looking mouth. He had as much teeth as a jack-o'-lantern. Not to judge this, guy just looked very sketchy. I could definitely feel his intentions were not good. Kinda smiled back nervously and just kinda nodded and started making my way back to my family and the fishing spot. As I walked away, I heard one of the ones in the distance holler,
Hey man, come over here. We want you to take our picture.
then heard the others laughing, and I noticed they were slowly making their way towards my direction. They were talking amongst themselves and lasting sinisterly. I could not make out what they were saying that good at this point, as I was casually but quickly leaving the area. I did make out a few comments like,
Yeah, I think he's alone.
and another say,
Nah, that's something something. His car's over right that way.
anyway. I finally made it back down to the bank and immediately told my wife to quickly start gathering our shit and head back to the car. She could tell by the sound of my voice and demeanor that something was wrong. We both half-heartedly packed up, grabbed the kid, and headed up the bank hill to where our vehicle was at. Still the only other people out there. Right as we got to the car, I noticed, and my wife saw for the first time what I was getting away from. They were in the distance coming out of the woods and heading right towards us. We threw our shit in the back, jumped in the car, and started heading out. I didn't want to worry my wife, but had the realization that there was only one way out of there. An old dirt road that meandered through the woods and passed near where they were at. I was afraid we might get cut off, so I floored it and just thought I will not stop for anything. As we were making our way out, I had seen something to the right out of my peripheral vision, and yep, it was one of them in full stride running towards us. This time I noticed he had something in his right hand that looked like an elongated tire iron or something. We lost them in the woods just about as they made it to the road. A while later, maybe 30 minutes, we made it to the old country concrete highway that led back to the city. At this point, we seen another vehicle in the distance coming in our direction, a beat-up old work truck. I thought, oh shit, they caught us. Then, as the vehicle approached, we got a much better look at the occupants, an old couple, and the husband looked like an older lumberjack type. Definitely looked like he could take care of himself. They slowed down as they approached, rolled down the window, and he asked if everything was okay, and if we were lost. I said no, we know how to get back to the main highway from here. I told him about what had happened back there, and he didn't even seem fazed. Just said that we should not be out here alone, as there's been some stories. I didn't ask, and then he said that he never comes out without his rifle and his Nam knife. I'm assuming Vietnam military knife. Anyway, we thanked them and got the hell out of there, never to return. Camping in general can be freaky. Not so much during the day, but when it gets dark, it gets dark. Whenever people say the Blair Witch Project wasn't scary, I always ask them if they've ever been camping. If you have, then that movie probably freaks you the fuck out. Laying in your tent at night, not knowing what is 3 feet away from you is terrifying. It's pitch black and quiet, like being alone in a creaky old house, except with a 10 times multiplier. Every sound could be a bear, wolf, or person out to get you, and if you're in a tent, you can't see what's out there. Probably my freakiest experience happened when I was a kid and went camping in Colorado. It was dark, but still too early for us to be tired, so we were just sitting around the fire doing the do. Talking, eating s'mores, whatever. I would say we were telling scary stories, but fuck that. We were probably talking about Disney movies or some shit. Keep in mind how dark it is out there. The light from the fire only goes out so far. It creates like this wall where all the light stops. We were sitting there when all of a sudden my sister looked up and saw a pair of eyes looking at us. Me and my sister started freaking out. We were like right on the edge of losing our minds scared. Parents calmed us down and told us not to move. We had no idea what it was. It was nearly impossible to judge how big it was. So we just sat there and waited for it to go away, which it did. It was probably a raccoon or some shit, but 6-year-old me was pretty sure it was the chupacabra. Not too interesting of a story, but definitely freaked us out. My dad admits to this day he wasn't scared, but notoriously has never been able to handle scary movies on any level. I call bullshit, Dad. You were scared. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail northbound in early August a few years ago, and I was a day out of Davenport Gap heading to Hot Springs, North Carolina. I don't remember the exact shelter I was at, but I know it was north of Max Patch. That time of year, there aren't many people on that trail. Other than a couple cars at Max Patch, I hadn't seen or spoken to any other person in a full day. I decided to end my hike for the day at about 7 p.m. so I could eat dinner and prepare for bed before dark. I was also filming a little diary of my hike as a gift from my sister. I ate, filmed, reloaded on my water, and hit the hay right as it got dark and the crickets came out. At about 2:30 a.m., I was startled awake, but not by a noise, rather the absolute silence around me. I didn't hear the toads, crickets, owls that you'd expect to hear and that I'd heard when I'd gone to sleep just 6 hours earlier. I looked around and saw nothing. Everything was perfectly still. I made the decision that I had to get the fuck out of there. I packed all my gear in about 5 minutes, threw on my headlamp, grabbed my bear bag, and noped my way up the trail. Pretty sure I averaged 4 miles per hour in pitch black until sunrise. Because of such an early departure, I finished my planned 18 miles into Hot Springs by 10 a.m., which was nice. To this day, I have no idea what was there that morning, but I know that something was there. I've encountered tons of predators in the woods, from black bears to coyotes, but I've never experienced that calm like that before. Made me think maybe it was some sort of large cat, or worse, some crazy person. Who knows what would have happened had I stayed until sunrise? Maybe nothing, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. This one is not as good, but what the hell. I was doing a long hike from Springer Mountain to Fontana Dam, about 165 miles. I was a little behind schedule on day 3, where I'd planned to take a near 0 day and spend some time at mountain crossings. Initially, I was going to spend night 2 in the hostel there, but a big storm prevented me from crossing Blood Mountain the day before. As a result, I had to revamp my plan and add about 7 miles to my day. So after a soda and a burger at mountain crossings, I hit the trail again. Come to a road crossing, and there's this guy with an old 80s style external frame pack taking a break. Being me, I stopped, pulled out a Cliff Bar and a smoke, and decided to have conversation for a bit. I could use the break anyway. We talked for a bit, and I alluded to which shelter I was headed to. Do not do this if you don't trust this person. That was my first mistake. The guy seemed a little odd, but this was the AT. Everyone is weird. At that point, we're all walking to Maine. We started talking about 1 p.m. He had started his day at Neil's Gap, and I had started on the other side of Blood Mountain. We had started roughly around the same time, and I had taken a 2-hour break. My pace easily put me ahead of this guy by 7 or 8 miles. The shelter I had alluded to was actually out of his range, or so I thought. There were also, if I remember correctly, 3 shelters between us and my final destination. We parted ways, and I kept on trucking. I get to camp and do my usual thing. We made good time, so I actually had quite a bit of downtime before a hike or midnight, which is 8 p.m. Several hours had passed. I had prepped for the night and was reworking my plan while talking to other hikers. And this guy rolls into camp looking like he had just gone on the Bataan Death March. He trucked it to catch up with me. The guy started to show his true colors in camp. He was really loud and obnoxious and would just not leave me alone. I decided that night that I would carry a bit of extra water and do breakfast outside of camp to try and distance myself from him. The next morning, I was up just before sunrise. I packed and hit the trail. A few miles up, I stopped for breakfast like planned. Not 1 or 2 miles later, I tweaked my knee on some rocks crossing Trey Mountain. That did it. I needed to get some rest and ice this thing. I go to the gap where you can either hitch west into Hiawassee, where most people go, or hitch east into Helen. I decided to go into Helen, as I'd figured I'd also take advantage of the Bavarian atmosphere that the town provides. Lo and behold, a few hours later, the same guy comes rolling into my hotel. Found out later that he had asked some southbounders about me and figured out where I went. Holy fuck, I thought. Now this is creepy. I had to get this guy away from me. I figured while in town I'd kill him with kindness. So I got some beers and made some more conversation. We were talking about our plans and I knew this was my chance. I told him that because of my knee, I was probably just going to take the next day off as well and continue on after that. He said he'd join me just like I expected. I said cool and went to my room. As soon as I got to my room, I packed up and set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. I phoned the owner of the hotel to make sure she could give me a ride to the trail that early. The next morning, I quietly grabbed my gear and hopped in her car. We headed a few miles up the road to the trailhead, and I basically started running. I never saw that guy again, but I heard stories about him up trail. That was a hell of a trip, though. Not 2 days later, I had a bear bed down within arm's reach of me in my tent. That's a story for a different thread, though, as it wasn't creepy, but comforting in a weird way. I haven't done a long hike in a few years. Telling these really makes me want to get back on the trail. I think I will this summer. This will probably get buried, but 2 years ago, myself, and 2 other people were camping in Yellow Bottom, which is in the Cascades of Oregon. About 3 a.m., I woke up hearing what sounded like a bunch of people having a campfire party. Nothing huge, not even scary, just talking, laughing, stuff like that. I was kind of pissed since we'd specifically come up to get away from the college kids and such. Now somebody had set up camp what sounded like less than 100 yards away. But I couldn't see fire or light through the tent walls. Since that was my big concern, fire in the woods, I just kind of ground my teeth about it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I wake up again. And this time somebody's let a little kid start crying. And it's really annoying. Like not wailing, but just sniffles. That long-term crying that kids do. I listened for about 5 minutes, and since I'm not a monster, I kind of got this prickly feeling that maybe there's trouble. You know, little kid crying all alone. Where the hell are its parents, etc. I started to get up, and my friend, who I thought was sleeping, grabs my arm, just about giving me a heart attack, and says, "Don't go out there. Just wait." He knows the woods better than me, and he sounded actually scared. So I sit and wait. And yeah, a few minutes later, the crying stops and the party starts back up. But the weird thing is, I can't really pinpoint now what direction the party is coming from. Because I was trying to tell if maybe it was a group who had found the kid, now they were all talking together. But I couldn't tell what direction it was from. The party went on for about another hour, just until dawn. Then all of a sudden, nothing. Like, cut off in the middle of a laugh silence. I was completely freaked out by then, and I think I might have made a noise when it just stopped like that. My friend, who hadn't even sat up the entire time, just said, "Stick Indians," and then rolled over and fell back asleep. I got up when the sun was finally completely up and made coffee and kind of looked around, but I'm not brave like that and didn't go far. There was nothing. No campfire, no tents I could see through the trees, nothing. We packed up that day and I asked him what a stick Indian was and he wouldn't tell me. Had to come back and Google it. And even now I'm not sure if what's online is true or made up or what. But if you look it up, apparently it's some kind of Yaquina forest spirit that lures people out by making noises like crying babies or people having a party, and then, I don't know, eats them or something. So that's my creepy thing in the woods. I don't have any proof, but people who know the Pacific Northwest, it was way up Yellow Bottom, past the official camps, on the left-hand fork of the main road down the logging road and right by the river. The campsite with the huge fallen over dead trees. That one. Me? Never been back up there. No, sir. I was hunting a big field for whitetail. It was public land, and I decided not to set up a tree stand and just sit behind some heavy cover on the ground. Try to get to my spots well before sunup, so I'm not making noise at first light. When many deer start to move. Got to my spot at about 5 a.m. It was absolutely pitch black, and all I had was my headlamp. After I switched off my headlamp, it was quiet for about 30 seconds, when suddenly I heard a howl from my right side. It was clear the howl came from the edge of the field I was in, roughly 200 yards away. It sent shivers down my spine. About 30 seconds passed when I heard a second howl in the opposite direction, on the other end of the field, probably 200 yards the other way. At this point, I'm pretty freaked out, but I figure it's highly unlikely anything would attack me. Not much longer, and from directly behind me, somewhere in the thick of the woods, a third howl. Now feel surrounded, and I'm terrified. My truck was about 500 yards away to my left, along the edge of the woods in the field down a narrow path that cuts right through the woods. I flicked on my headlamp, took the safety off my gun, equipped my hunting knife, and got the fuck out as fast as I could. I waited until the sun came up before I went back and actually hunted. I never saw a deer that entire weekend. I presume whatever was howling drove the deer out, and I don't blame the deer one bit. The entire experience was very scary, and I've done a lot of hunting and camping. I spent a ton of time in the woods both during the day and night, and nothing has ever freaked me out so bad. I do believe it was a wolf and not coyotes. The area doesn't hold a lot of wolves, but it is known to have some. I know the difference between a wolf and a coyote howl. A story that goes back. Seen a Bigfoot in 6th grade camp. Snuck out one night because I was a little shit back then. Decided to go freak the girls out by jumping on the low roof. I was thinking about spying then, just to torment. But I seen a teacher doing a patrol, so I decided to revert course and head to the far side of the lake in the woods. Now this was May in Michigan, so the leaves just started coming out. Climbing a hill, and just as I make it over the top, I see a shadow move to my right, farther deep into the woods. It was also pitch black, and I could hear a storm coming in the distance over anything else, so I didn't hear it. I thought it might have been a fellow camper, so I called out to whatever it was. I've grown up in the woods, so I had a little fear of anything. No response. I thought then it might have been a tree moving. Then I seen it move quicker than before away. You know that saying, curiosity kills the cat? That was no different for this enraged child I was. I decided to give chase to this mysterious thing. Follow the mass up over another hill, suddenly met by a huge gust front from the storm. Then came the gushing of rain. I was distracted by this for a second, but when I regained focus, the shadow was gone. I had to find it again, so I went wandering in the rain. Stumbled around for who knows how long until I was struck by a sickening feeling. I had no idea where I was or where camp was. I shit myself there and then. But that feeling could not compare to the complete bowel movement I was about to have. I decided, fuck the shadow, I need to get back in bed before wakey time. I took a direction and went with it. But then I could hear footsteps over the rain and wind behind me. That meant one of three things. This thing was huge, this thing was close, or both. Turns out it was the latter. I turned around, and for whatever reason, lightning struck close by, lighting up the woods. And there, 10 yards behind me, was an 8-foot-plus humanoid creature who was in mid-stride at me. After lightning subsided, I froze. Then I yelled, "What the f-?" But before I could get the rest of it out, it gave a roar, so loud and so close, I could feel its breath on my face. It took off the way it came from. I was left there with my newly baggy shorts. I was speechless. I just ran towards the direction I was going before I erupted on the shore of the lake. I slipped back into camp unnoticed and into the bathroom and just broke down. Later, I tried telling my friends, but they just thought I was joking. I was backpacking in Colorado years ago, near Crested Butte. It was late June, but was just unusually cold. One afternoon, it clouded over like there was going to be a storm. Sure enough, there was. A thunder snowstorm. Anyway, one evening it was getting towards dark, and I found an open cabin. Nothing was in it, just some bunks that were built into the walls, but no other furniture or signs of occupation. I set my tent nearby and just waited to see if anyone came to stay, but by dark it was still empty, and there were no roads. So I assumed it was vacant for the night. Put my sleeping bag down inside on the bunk and tried to get to sleep. I should mention at this point there was a gravel path outside, and just as I'm dozing off, I heard footsteps on the path. I sat up, turned on my flashlight, said hello. The footsteps stopped. I got up and looked around outside but didn't see anyone. I went back to my bag, thinking I'd mistaken the noise. Some minutes later, I hear the footsteps again. Now I'm really starting to freak. I went out again, this time with my sheath knife out in my hand. Again, nothing. Shitting bricks, but went back to bed. The next time I heard it, it sounded like it was inside, and I shot my flashlight in the direction of the sound in time to see a fairly large rat in the open, and it darted away. I walked over with the flashlight to where it had gone through a hole in the wall and discovered that it was insulated with styrofoam and that it had teeth marks in it. The rats chewing on the styrofoam was what was making the noise. I thought for sure I'd stumbled upon some crazy Unabomber's place. If you've gotten this far, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.